Have you ever wondered why, no matter how carefully you plan your life, certain patterns keep repeating themselves? The same arguments with different people, the same kind of relationships that begin with excitement and end in exhaustion, the same mistakes dressed in new circumstances that always lead you back to the same emotional place. Have you ever stopped long enough to ask whether you are truly the one steering the wheel, or whether something older, deeper, and far less conscious might be guiding your hands without your permission? Most men don't ask those questions until they hit a wall, until the marriage collapses, the business they built no longer excites them, or the silence in their own head becomes too heavy to ignore. Because as men, we are conditioned from the very beginning to believe that being in control is the definition of strength. Control your work. Control your temper. Control your family. Control your future. The idea that the mind could be playing its own hidden game, that much of what you call your decisions might in fact be reactions from wounds you've never even named, that feels threatening. Because it implies that the life you've spent decades constructing might not be built on pure will or reason, but on invisible emotional contracts signed when you were too young to understand them. Jung called this the tyranny of the unconscious, that immense, unseen layer of the psyche made up of every suppressed emotion, every unprocessed memory, every piece of the self that was deemed unacceptable and therefore buried. You think you've moved on from your past, but the truth is that what you refuse to face doesn't disappear. It reorganizes itself and begins to run your life from the shadows. The man who cannot see his own unconscious becomes ruled by it, even as he convinces himself he's the one in charge. When you look back across your choices, do you see genuine freedom, or do you see repetition wearing a new disguise? The man who constantly finds himself in jobs where he must prove his worth to disapproving authority figures is usually still arguing with his father's ghost. The man who keeps choosing partners he has to rescue is reenacting the old need to feel useful because somewhere in his childhood, love was confused with service. The man who avoids confrontation at all costs isn't peaceful. He's terrified of the anger he was punished for showing as a boy. The mind is an archivist that never stops recording, and everything that was once unbearable finds its way into that archive. Later, when you least expect it, the archive takes over the controls. You'll call it instinct, chemistry, personality, preference. Anything except what it really is. Repetition seeking resolution. Every argument, every failure, every self-sabotaging decision is an old story trying to end differently. But unless you become conscious of it, you will simply keep replaying the same scene under different lighting. This is why so many men reach their 30s or 40s and start to feel that eerie sense of déjà vu, that realization that despite all the progress, all the achievements, life seems to circle back to the same emotional point. It's not fate, it's programming. And no amount of external success will override what your unconscious has not yet resolved. Control is intoxicating because it offers the illusion of safety. When a man can predict and command the world around him, he feels powerful, or at least protected from the unpredictability of emotion. But control is almost always compensation for fear. Fear of chaos, fear of weakness, fear of loss. You tighten your grip on your routines, your relationships, your environment, not because you are disciplined, but because some part of you still remembers what it felt like when things once slipped completely out of your grasp. Perhaps you grew up in a home where emotions were volatile or absent, where you had to become the stabilizer, the protector, or the invisible one just to survive. Perhaps you were rewarded for composure and punished for vulnerability. Whatever the story, the lesson was clear. If you could just stay in control, you could stay safe. But decades later, that same survival strategy becomes the very thing that suffocates you. The man who must control everything eventually realizes that he no longer has room to breathe. He plans every hour of the day, but he cannot rest. He achieves his goals, but he cannot feel satisfied. He commands respect, but he cannot feel intimacy. His life is full, but his inner world is barren. And when he finally stops to ask why, he hears an unsettling whisper from somewhere deep inside. Because you're not the one truly in charge. Every man carries a shadow, the hidden collection of instincts, emotions, and desires that the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. It is made of everything you've judged, denied, or feared within yourself. The anger you were told was dangerous, the sensitivity you were shamed for, the ambition you suppressed to appear humble, the lust, the jealousy, the vulnerability. The shadow doesn't vanish when you ignore it. It simply waits for an opportunity to express itself indirectly. It appears as projection. The qualities you criticize most fiercely in others are often the ones you've disowned in yourself. It appears as addiction, the urge to numb feelings you don't know how to face. It appears as overcompensation, the need to look strong precisely because you feel fragile. And here is the cruel irony. The more you deny the shadow, the more it controls you. The parts of yourself you refuse to own will always find ways to act through you. You will speak their language while insisting it isn't yours. You will create the very situations that trigger the emotions you claim to have mastered. This is how the unconscious rules your life. Not by external force, but by quiet manipulation of your choices. You will think you're choosing that argument, that partner, that career path, that reaction, but you're not. The unconscious makes the choice first. Consciousness comes later and invents a reason to justify it. That's not weakness. That's the architecture of the psyche. You're not a machine with perfect rational control. You are a living ecosystem of drives, memories, instincts, archetypes, and inherited patterns, all negotiating for influence. The man who claims he is completely in control is simply the one most controlled by what he refuses to see. Real power begins the moment you stop pretending you're fully conscious. The moment you realize that humility, not domination, is the foundation of mastery. When a man starts to ask, what inside me made me react that way? What was I defending? What am I still afraid to feel? That's when control transforms into awareness. And awareness is the only kind of control worth having. If this journey eases something inside you, stay with us. Subscribe, and each step will bring a little more clarity. Thank you. This awakening usually begins through crisis. Life finds a way to expose the unconscious. A relationship ends and the pain feels far older than the breakup itself. A career collapses and the humiliation touches something from childhood. A health scare strips away the illusion of immortality. These events are not punishments, they are interventions. The psyche uses disruption to demand consciousness, because the unconscious will keep running the show until you are willing to meet it face to face. At this stage, many men experience disorientation. The old certainty dissolves. The armor feels heavy. The persona, the version of yourself you built for the world, starts to crack. You may find yourself quieter, more reflective, less certain about what you want, more aware of your contradictions. It feels like losing control, but it is actually the beginning of reclaiming it. I want to pause here and ask you something very direct. Think about one area of your life where you keep seeing the same painful pattern. Maybe in love, maybe in anger, maybe in work. Where does it repeat, even when you swear it won't happen again? Share it in the comments, if you feel called. Not for advice, not for approval, but to give shape to it. Because speaking a pattern aloud is the first step toward making it conscious. Another man might read your comment and realize he's not alone in living the same cycle. That moment of recognition can change lives more than you realize. Most men pride themselves on being logical. We like to think that our choices are rational, our actions deliberate, our plans calculated. But logic is rarely the driver. It's the narrator. The unconscious acts first, emotion reacts second, and logic arrives last to write the story in a way that makes us look reasonable. A man decides to quit his job, leave a marriage, start a business, move to another city. And later he'll explain it with tidy language about opportunity or strategy, when in truth the deeper motivation was emotional, instinctive, sometimes even ancestral. The conscious mind is like a politician giving press conferences about decisions it didn't actually make. That's why therapy, reflection, or solitude feel threatening. They expose how much of what you call who I am is just conditioning. But once you admit that truth, something beautiful happens. Humility turns into clarity. When you stop needing to prove control, you gain influence over what truly matters. Your reactions, your perceptions, your values. The goal isn't to eliminate the unconscious. That's impossible. The goal is to build relationship with it, to bring awareness where there was blind instinct, to treat the inner world with respect rather than fear. Because the man who befriends his own depths becomes someone the world cannot easily manipulate. He is not swayed by trends, approval, or chaos. He acts from center, not from wound. You can see the unconscious at work every day if you learn how to watch it. It shows up in the way you instantly tense when someone criticizes you, even gently. That's not rational. That's the body remembering the sting of early judgment. It appears when you overreact to small inconveniences, because your nervous system still treats frustration as threat. It reveals itself in attraction, why you feel magnetically drawn to certain people who mirror unresolved aspects of yourself. It lives in your habits, your procrastination, your sudden bursts of anger, your relentless need to be productive, your inability to rest. You might think you're tired from work, but often you're tired from resistance, from spending your life suppressing feelings instead of understanding them. You might think you're disciplined, but sometimes what looks like discipline is just fear of slowing down long enough to hear what your soul actually needs. Every behavior has a psychological purpose, even the ones that hurt you. The unconscious doesn't care about logic, it cares about expression. If a part of you needs to feel something, it will create circumstances that force you to feel it, even if it means pain. So the question is not whether the unconscious rules your life. It's how consciously you're willing to cooperate with it. Because awareness does not erase darkness, but it changes your relationship to it. A mature man learns to revisit his past, not to blame anyone, but to reclaim the parts of himself that got trapped there. This is not indulgence or weakness. It's strategy. You cannot outperform trauma. You can only outconscious it. The anger, guilt, or shame that you refuse to examine will keep leaking into your relationships and decisions. But when you face it, calmly, consistently, compassionately, it loses the power to rule you. You realize that control isn't about rigidity, it's about presence. The man who can stay present with his emotions without being hijacked by them is far stronger than the man who suppresses them out of fear. Presence is control turned inside out. It's awareness that doesn't require domination. Men who begin this work often describe it as waking from a long dream. For years, they lived according to a script. Chase success, accumulate things, keep emotions in check. Stay busy enough not to feel too much. Then something breaks, and suddenly they see the machinery beneath the surface. It's both humbling and liberating. They realize that for all the external control they tried to maintain, their inner world was in chaos. When you wake up to that, there's grief. Grief for the years spent unconscious, grief for the relationships that suffered, grief for the parts of you that never had a voice. But there's also relief, because once you've seen the strings, you can start cutting them. You can begin to act with awareness instead of reflex. You can recognize when your reactions are older than the moment, when your defenses belong to a version of you that no longer exists. That's what psychological freedom looks like. Not perfection, but participation. You're no longer a passenger pretending to drive. You're in honest dialogue with the forces inside you, aware of the storms, aware of the shadows, but not owned by them. Power changes meaning once you understand the unconscious. It stops being about domination and starts being about direction. It's not about controlling people or outcomes. It's about guiding energy, both within and around you. A man who understands his inner landscape can harness aggression without letting it poison him. He can express desire without shame, anger without cruelty, confidence without arrogance. His authority doesn't come from volume or intimidation. It comes from alignment. He doesn't need to prove control because he has cultivated trust in his own depth. This is the kind of power that influences without effort, leads without forcing, and protects without imprisoning. It's the power of presence. The kind of presence that calms a room simply by existing in it. But you only reach that level of authority when you've stopped pretending you are fully rational, when you've made peace with the fact that you are part conscious, part shadow, part instinct, part soul. You will never be fully conscious. No man is. But you can become increasingly aware. You can learn to notice the patterns faster, recover from triggers quicker, and act from principle rather than impulse. Integration means you don't exile any part of yourself. You bring them home. The angry part, the scared part, the ashamed part, they all get a seat at the table. You stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable versions. The paradox is that when you allow your inner contradictions to coexist, you actually become more stable. This is the journey of individuation, the lifelong process Jung described as becoming the whole of who you are, not just the part that looks good to others. It's demanding, uncomfortable, and endlessly humbling. But it's also the only path to real freedom, because until you face what drives you, you can't truly choose your life. You can only repeat it. So when I say men think they're in control, they're not. I don't mean it as an insult. I mean it as an invitation to stop fighting for the illusion of control and start cultivating the reality of consciousness. To recognize that the goal was never to dominate the world, but to understand yourself well enough that the world no longer dominates you. You don't need to become perfect. You don't need to eradicate fear or erase instinct or sterilize emotion. You need only to bring light where there was blindness, choice where there was compulsion, honesty where there was denial. That is the work of a lifetime. And if you find yourself listening to this because something inside you feels restless, uncertain, or tired of repeating the same old cycles, trust that feeling. That's the unconscious knocking on the door, asking to be seen, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Be the man who chooses awareness over control. Be the man who learns to see before he reacts. Be the man who lives his life consciously, even when it hurts. Not perfectly, reliably. Begin. If you've stayed with me until now, it means you're searching for something deeper, maybe an answer you've carried since childhood. Don't stop here. Perhaps the next video holds the key you've been waiting for, the piece that helps you untangle another thread of your story.